Please don't rip it, Miss Vivian, Nia Brooks whispered, but the paper had already begun to tear. The sound cut through Richard Ellison's marble living room sharper than the silver knife beside the birthday cake. His hand froze above his water glass as 4 pieces of a child's drawing drifted onto the white floor. Vivian Hart smiled at the family and said, "Children of staff need boundaries." Nia bent down and picked up one piece. "Then why is your pin in my picture?" 3 hours earlier, the Ellison mansion had looked too polished to hide anything ugly. The front windows shone above the long driveway, the hedges were clipped into perfect walls, and every black car that rolled through the gate left no sound behind it. Inside, trays of champagne moved from hand to hand. White roses stood in tall glass vases. A pianist played near the staircase, soft enough not to interrupt important people. Richard Ellison, founder of Ellison Meridian Capital, stood near the fireplace while lawyers, cousins, board members, and old family friends brought gifts for his 60th birthday. A Swiss watch, a first edition book, a gold pen meant for signing deals, a bottle of wine older than half the people in the room. Every gift came in velvet, leather, or polished wood. Every person had their name announced by the house manager before they stepped forward. Then Nia came in without an announcement. She did not enter from the front hall. She came from the service corridor beside the kitchen, holding a rolled sheet of drawing paper tied with an old yellow ribbon. Her mother, Tasha Brooks, stopped behind her with a stack of dessert plates in both hands. "Nia," Tasha whispered, not angry, only afraid. The little girl looked back once, then held the roll tighter against her blue dress, the one with a faint bleach mark near the pocket. She had spent all week on that drawing at the kitchen table after homework, blowing on wet paint, sharpening the same short pencil with a butter knife, because the real sharpener had gone missing. She had drawn the living room from memory. The fireplace, the apple tree outside the tall window, Mr. Richard standing beneath the portrait of his late wife, Eleanor. She had even drawn Miss Vivian near the back hallway, because that was where Nia had seen her 2 nights before, coming out of the locked library when the old clock struck 11. At the time, Nia had not known why that mattered. She had only noticed the way Vivian closed her fist around something green and shiny, then pressed a blue folder under her arm as if it were burning her. Now, as Richard's guests laughed softly over champagne, Nia waited at the edge of the carpet for the house manager to finish reading another name. No one read hers. Vivian saw her first. The billionaire's fiancé wore cream silk, diamond earrings, and the kind of smile that made people lower their voices around her. "Sweetheart," she said, walking over with one hand already extended. "This is a family presentation." The words sounded gentle. Her fingers did not. They closed around the ribbon before Nia could step back. "I made it for Mr. Richard," Nia said. Richard turned at the sound of his name. He did not smile, but his eyes paused on the rolled paper. Vivian's smile held steady as she untied the ribbon in front of everyone. The drawing opened across her hands. For 1 second, nothing moved except the candlelight on the glass tables. Then Vivian's thumb covered the bottom corner of the picture, exactly where Nia had painted the green leaf-shaped pin. Vivian's thumb stayed there a fraction too long. It was not the way someone held a child's drawing to admire it. It was the way someone covered a stain on a dress before anyone else could notice. Nia saw it, and Richard saw Nia seeing it, though he did not yet understand why that small exchange made the air around the fireplace feel colder. "This is very sweet," Vivian said, but the words came out polished and empty. Her eyes moved quickly over the paper. The apple tree, the fireplace, Richard beneath Eleanor's portrait, the white lilies near the back hallway, and the small green leaf shape in the lower corner. Then her hand tightened. The paper bent. Nia stepped forward. "Please don't," she whispered. Vivian looked down at her with that careful smile people used when there were guests watching. "Honey, you cannot bring kitchen drawings into a family ceremony and expect everyone to stop." She folded the drawing once, sharply. Tasha made a tiny sound behind the dessert tray. "Miss Hart," she said, barely louder than a breath. Vivian tore the paper before Tasha could finish. Once, twice, for pieces. The sound was dry and final. No one gasped loudly. That was what made it worse. The room simply adjusted itself around the cruelty, like rich rooms often did. One cousin looked into his glass. A board member checked his cufflink. The house manager stared at the floor. Nia did not cry. She crouched immediately, pressing one palm against the marble to stop a piece from sliding under the sofa. Vivian sighed, soft enough to sound burdened instead of cruel. This is exactly why boundaries matter, Richard. Children get confused when staff families are allowed too close. Richard's eyes moved from the torn paper to Vivian's hand. Her fingers were still curved as if they were holding something. It was only a drawing, he said. His voice was quiet, but not gentle. Vivian turned toward him. Exactly. And I would rather correct this now than let people believe your private home is open for little performances. Nia lifted one torn piece to her chest. I wasn't performing. Vivian's smile thinned. Then what were you doing, sweetheart? Nia swallowed. Her chin trembled once, but she held it still. Remembering. That word made Richard look at her again. Caleb had already moved from his place near the staircase. He knelt beside Nia in his dark suit and began picking up the pieces one by one, careful not to crease them more. Caleb, Vivian said, a warning hidden inside his name. He did not answer. Richard watched his son's shoulders, the way they had gone rigid. Caleb had spent most family events silent since Eleanor died. Silent at dinners, silent at charity photographs, silent whenever Vivian touched his arm and told people he was still healing. But now his hand stopped over one scrap of paper, and his thumb brushed away a little dust from the edge. Nia, Richard said, when did you draw this? This week, she answered. After school. After Mama finished laundry. And the hallway? Vivian interrupted softly. Children imagine rooms all the time. Nia looked at her, not Richard. I didn't imagine the clock. Vivian blinked once. Too fast. Richard heard it before he saw it, that half-second break in her rhythm. What clock? He asked. Nia pointed toward the back corridor, though the wall hid it from view. The tall one outside the library. It makes a low sound first, then it rings. I counted 11 because Mama says when it rings 11, I have to stop drawing and sleep. A faint laugh came from one of the relatives, but it died when Richard did not join it. Vivian touched the diamond at her throat. Richard, I was at the St. Bartholomew Hospital Gala that evening. There are photographs. No one said which evening, Caleb murmured. Vivian turned toward him. For the first time, her smile arrived late. Richard lowered his glass onto the mantel without drinking. Nia carefully opened the piece in her hand, and on the torn white margin, written in a child's uneven pencil, were two small numbers beside the green shape, 1117. The pencil marks were crooked, the 7 leaning so far it almost touched the 1. But Richard knew children did not usually write time unless something had taught them to remember it. 1117, he said, not as a question. Nia nodded once. Vivian gave a soft breath that might have passed for amusement if her hand had not moved so quickly toward the torn pieces. Richard, she is 8. She could have written that after hearing any adult mention it. No one mentioned it, Caleb said. His voice stayed low, but it cut cleanly through the room. Vivian looked at him, and the tenderness she wore for guests tightened at the edges. Caleb, this is not helping. Nia shifted closer to the coffee table, keeping the scrap against her chest. I wrote it because the clock was late, she said. Richard's eyes lifted. Late? It rings 5 minutes after my mama's phone, Nia said. Mama sets an alarm for 11:12 so she can start the last laundry load before midnight. The clock rang after that. So I wrote 11:17. Tasha's face went pale above the dessert plates. She had not expected her daughter to remember that much. Richard turned his head slowly toward the back corridor, as if the old clock were suddenly visible through the walls. It had belonged to his father, a tall walnut thing with a brass moon that rose and fell behind glass. Eleanor used to complain it ran behind no matter how often the repairman came. Richard had not thought about that in years. Vivian stepped between him and the hallway. This is becoming uncomfortable for everyone, she said, voice smooth again. Tasha, please take Nia to the kitchen. We can talk privately later. Nia did not move. She opened the scrap just enough for Richard to see the green shape more clearly. It was not just a green mark. It was a leaf-shaped brooch, small, uneven, with a silver stem and one thin white slash across the right side. Richard's mouth parted, but no words came. He saw Eleanor's hand in his memory, fastening that brooch to a navy coat before a winter fundraiser. He saw the same white slash, made the night she dropped it on the stone steps, and laughed because only she would damage an heirloom 5 minutes before photographers arrived. Where did you see that? He asked. The room seemed to lean in without moving. Vivian answered before Nia could. There are portraits all over this house. Eleanor wore jewelry. The child draws what she sees. Nia looked up at her. Not in the pictures. Vivian's smile did not change, but her eyes did. Excuse me? In the big picture by the stairs, the pin is on the other side, Nia said. And it doesn't have the white line. I checked because I thought I drew it wrong. Caleb stood. Without asking permission, he crossed to the console beneath Eleanor's portrait near the staircase and took the framed photograph into both hands. The glass caught the chandelier light as he brought it back. In the photograph, Eleanor smiled beside Richard, the emerald brooch pinned neatly to her left lapel, perfect and unmarked. No white slash, no damaged edge. Richard stared at the photo, then at the torn drawing, then at Vivian's thumb, which had gone still against the diamond ring on her finger. Maybe another photograph, Vivian said. Too fast. Too many words followed. There are albums upstairs, Charity. Programs, old newspaper clippings. Staff pass through storage all the time. Tasha could have shown her anything. Tasha flinched at her name, but Nia turned sharply. My mama didn't take me upstairs. Her voice was small, not weak. You did. Vivian's head snapped toward her. A silence opened so cleanly that even the pianist stopped playing on the wrong note. Richard did not ask what Nia meant. He only watched Vivian's face, because for the first time all evening, she was not looking at him. She was looking at the house manager near the library hall. The man had one hand over his tablet screen, and when Caleb stepped closer, the date on it vanished beneath his palm. The house manager's hand did not move from the tablet until Richard looked directly at it. Mr. Ellison, the man said, his voice careful, the way staff spoke when they had learned that truth could cost more than silence. Perhaps we should handle this away from the guests. Vivian nodded at once, as if relieved someone had finally chosen order. That would be best. This child is overwhelmed. Nia's fingers tightened around the torn scrap, but she did not lower her eyes. Richard heard the phrase "this child" and watched Tasha's shoulders fold inward as if the words had weight. Her name is Nia, Caleb said. The house manager glanced at him, then back to Richard. Of course, Mr. Caleb. I only mean this is a private family matter. It became private, Nia said softly, when people started hiding things. No one answered. Richard stepped away from the fireplace and looked at the tablet. Show me the library hall log. The house manager hesitated just long enough for the pause to become a thing everyone could feel. Sir, security logs require authorization. You have mine. Vivian crossed the room with practiced calm. Richard, please. You are letting a child's picture turn your birthday into an interrogation. She touched his sleeve. Her hand looked steady, but the diamond on her finger clicked once against his cufflink. If something was misplaced after Eleanor passed, we can review it tomorrow with Martin. Not in front of donors. Not in front of staff. Richard did not pull away, but he did not soften. Bring Eleanor's jewelry case. The command was quiet. It moved through the room faster than a shout. A maid disappeared toward the private staircase. While they waited, Vivian turned toward Tasha with a sorrowful expression that made her accusation look almost kind. Tasha, I am sure this is embarrassing for you. Children repeat what they hear. Sometimes they pick up little things and do not understand. Tasha opened her mouth, then closed it. A silver dessert fork trembled against the top plate in her hands. She didn't steal anything, Nia said. Vivian looked down at her. No one used that word, sweetheart. You were going to. That landed harder than if Nia had shouted it. Richard's eyes moved to Vivian. She gave a small, wounded laugh, but it had no air in it. The maid returned carrying a dark velvet box with brass corners. Richard opened it himself. Inside, pearls, cuff pins, and old family pieces rested in their shaped places. One space was empty, lined in green velvet, curved like a leaf. Nia looked at it and made one small sound. Not surprise, but recognition. Vivian exhaled. That proves nothing. Tasha has cleaned that room for months. Caleb stood up straighter. Stop saying her name like that. The house manager cleared his throat. For everyone's comfort, perhaps the Brooks family should wait in the service hall while security checks Mrs. Brooks's locker. Tasha went still. Nia looked at her mother's apron pocket, then at the broken drawing on the floor. Richard saw that look, the quick calculation of a child deciding whether truth was worth making her mother smaller in front of rich people. Before anyone could move, Nia placed her scrap on the coffee table. Test me, she said. Vivian blinked. What? Nia took the short pencil from behind her ear, the same pencil she had used all week, and pointed toward the blank back of an invitation card. Ask me to draw the hallway. Richard slid the card toward her. Vivian's smile returned, slow and polished. Richard, this is absurd. But Nia was already drawing. Not beautifully, not like an artist trying to impress adults. She drew like a witness. A tall clock, a vase of lilies, the library door, the private elevator, a small black rectangle near the ceiling. Then she drew the rectangle again, but left the center blank. That light was off, she said. Richard looked at the head of security. Was the camera outside the library off Thursday night? The man checked his tablet, jaw tightening. There was a maintenance interruption. What time? Richard asked. 11:12 to 11:23. Nia whispered. The clock rang in the middle. Vivian lifted both hands, graceful and patient, as if calming a nervous room. Then there is your answer. She saw a dark camera. Imagine the rest, and now everyone is upset. Please let me take her and her mother somewhere quiet. She stepped close to Nia and reached for the torn pieces. Nia pulled them back. No, ma'am. Richard did not miss the way Vivian's eyes sharpened. The house manager moved quickly to guide Tasha toward the side door, and for 1 second it seemed Vivian had recovered the room. Then Richard looked down at Nia's new drawing and saw the detail she had not explained. The black security camera was labeled in tiny crooked letters, North Hall, exactly the name Vivian had used under her breath before anyone else in the room had said it. Richard did not ask Nia how she knew the words North Hall. He only kept looking at the small crooked letters until the room seemed to understand that silence had become more dangerous than questions. Vivian followed his gaze, and for the first time that evening, her face did not arrange itself quickly enough. Children hear staff talk, she said. Security calls things by names. It means nothing. Richard lifted one finger, and the house manager stopped guiding Tasha toward the service door. No one leaves. The sentence was not loud, but the marble room obeyed it. Nia stayed beside the coffee table, one hand on the torn drawing, the other still holding the short pencil. Caleb stood close enough that his shadow fell over the scraps like a shield. Richard turned to the head of security. Print the access report for North Hall. Thursday night, 10:45 to midnight. The man hesitated. Sir, those reports are usually reviewed by Mr. Vale's office. Vivian's chin lifted slightly. Exactly. Martin handles legal chain of custody. If you pull raw internal reports in front of guests, you risk compromising your own security procedure. It sounded reasonable. It sounded protective. It sounded like the kind of thing Richard had paid lawyers for 30 years to say. Still, his eyes moved to Nia's hand, to the way her fingers pressed down on the torn paper, as if a rich person might make even evidence disappear if she blinked. Print it, he said. The security chief walked to the side console and connected his tablet to the small office printer hidden behind the bar cabinet. While the machine woke with a low mechanical hum, Vivian stepped toward Nia with a softer face. Sweetheart, she said. kneeling just enough to seem kind without truly lowering herself. You have caused a lot of confusion. If you give me the picture, I'll have someone tape it for you later. Nia shook her head. No, ma'am. It is torn. It still knows what it saw. Caleb's mouth tightened. Richard looked away first. Not because the sentence was childish, but because it was not. The printer began spitting out white pages. The house manager gathered them. But before he could hand them to Richard, Vivian said, "There will be a maintenance gap. We already know that." She drew a dark camera. "This is not a mystery." Richard stopped reaching for the pages. "How did you know the report would call it a gap?" Vivian's eyes moved once toward the paper, then back to him. "Because that is what security interruptions are called." The house manager's fingers shifted on the pages. Richard took them himself. The access log was neat, time-stamped, color-coded, the kind of record that usually made uncertainty disappear. At 11:12 p.m., the North Hall camera went offline for scheduled maintenance. At 11:17 p.m., key card VH accessed the private elevator. At 11:18 p.m., the library lock disengaged. At 11:23 p.m., the camera came back online. Richard did not move for several seconds. The paper bent slightly under his thumb. The room had watched him sign billion-dollar term sheets without blinking. But now he stood over a 6-inch wide report as if it weighed more than the house. Vivian gave a small sigh. "My card was in my clutch all night at the gala. Someone must have cloned it." "You were at the hospital gala," Richard said. "Yes." "At 11:17. "Yes." Her answer came too fast. Nia reached for another torn piece Caleb had placed near the edge of the table. "There's more," she said. Vivian straightened. "Enough." The word slipped out clean and hard before she covered it with a smile. "I mean, enough pressure on her. Look at her. She is a child." But Nia had already turned the scrap around. It showed only the corner of a blue folder, badly drawn, with white letters copied in uneven pencil. Caleb leaned closer, and the color left his face before Richard read the words. Caleb Mental Fitness Review. No one spoke. Even the printer stopped clicking, leaving only the faint buzz of the chandelier. Richard took the torn piece carefully, not from disbelief now, but as if touching it too roughly might hurt the person who had carried it. "Nia," he said, his voice lower, "do you know what these words mean?" She shook her head. "No, sir. I copied them because the folder was blue like my school binder. And because Miss Vivian said his name." Caleb's eyes lifted to Vivian. She did not look at him. That was the first thing Richard noticed. The second was worse. In the access report, below the library entry, the maintenance request was approved by Martin Vale, the family lawyer Richard had trusted with Eleanor's will. Richard read Martin Vale's name twice, then folded the access report along its printed crease, as if it were only another household document. He did not raise his voice. He did not look at Vivian long enough to warn her that something inside him had shifted. He simply said, "Marcia, call Claire Dunn and ask her to come by in the morning." Vivian's face warmed with concern at once. "Claire? Your outside counsel?" "Richard, for a family misunderstanding. For an estate tax question," he said. The lie was small, smooth, and heavy. Across the room, the house seemed to breathe again because no one had been publicly accused. Glasses lifted. The pianist touched one cautious note. In the kitchen corridor, a dishwasher hummed behind a swinging door, and somewhere a spoon struck the inside of a mug. A tiny sound that made Nia think of late nights waiting for her mother to finish work. Vivian used that soft moment. She crouched near Nia again, holding out a folded napkin as if offering mercy. "Sweetheart, you have been very brave, but grown-up papers can scare children. How about we get your mother home early tonight, and tomorrow I'll send over a new art set. The big one, with every color." Nia looked at the napkin, then at the torn pieces Caleb had gathered. "I don't need colors," she said. "I need nobody to say my mama stole." Tasha closed her eyes. Richard heard that too. Not the grammar, the burden. A child had not asked for money, a room, a dress, or a reward. She had asked for a lie not to become official. Richard slipped the access report inside his jacket and turned to Marcia, who had already moved toward the side office with her phone low against her palm. "Check the printer queue," he said softly, almost as if asking for more ice. "Thursday night. Library office. Anything with Caleb's name." Vivian's head turned a little too quickly. "Richard, the printer queue is confidential. So is my son." The words stopped her. Marcia returned 5 minutes later carrying 3 thin pages that had no letterhead, only a faint gray bar at the top from a scanned document. She did not hand them to Vivian. She placed them on the coffee table before Richard, beside the torn drawing. Caleb saw his name first. Caleb Ellison Mental Fitness Review. Below it were phrases that sounded clinical enough to be merciful and cruel enough to be useful. Emotional instability, impaired judgment, recommended temporary fiduciary supervision. Richard's thumb moved down the page until it reached a blank line labeled Guardian Advisor. Beside it was Martin Vale's typed name. Below that, in smaller text, was a reference to the Eleanor Ellison Trust. Caleb took one step back, as if the paper had touched him. Vivian covered the silence with a breathy, wounded voice. "Richard Martin was drafting options. Caleb has struggled. Everyone knows that. I was trying to protect him from pressure he isn't ready for." Caleb's eyes stayed on the floor. Nia looked from him to Vivian and said, "But you didn't sound like protecting." Vivian's mouth closed. Richard turned slowly. What did she sound like? Nia held the smallest scrap of the drawing, the one she had kept pinched inside her palm so tightly the corner was damp. "Like when people talk about moving a chair," she said. "Not a person." No one laughed this time. Tasha whispered, "Baby, that's enough." Not because Nia was wrong, but because truth had already taken too much space in a room that did not belong to them. Then Marcia's phone vibrated on the table. She glanced at the screen and went still. "Mr. Ellison," she said, "there's another scan from that same printer. A resignation form." Richard already knew before she turned it around. Tasha Brooks, voluntary termination, effective Monday. The signature line was blank, but a yellow sticky note had been scanned with it. In neat handwriting, someone had written, "If she refuses, use the missing brooch." Richard looked at the torn child's drawing, the empty green velvet slot, his son's name on a legal review, and Tasha standing with dessert plates still in her hands like a woman afraid to set anything down in a rich man's house. For the first time, he understood that Vivian had not been hiding one stolen object. She had been building a story, and he had given her the walls to build it inside. Richard did not let the realization show on his face. That was the first thing power had taught him, long before the mansion, before the private elevators, before people lowered their voices when he entered a room. Panic helped the person watching you. Calm made them wonder what you had already seen. He set the scanned resignation form beside the torn drawing and looked at Vivian as if the papers were merely unpleasant, not damning. "We will not discuss this in the living room," he said. Vivian's shoulders eased by 1 invisible inch. She thought privacy meant control. Richard let her think it. "Tomorrow morning," he continued, "the Eleanor Trust Committee is already scheduled to meet. We'll put the Caleb documents in front of the proper people then." Vivian nodded slowly, rebuilding herself with each word. "That is wise. Martin can explain the drafts." "I'm sure he can." Richard turned to the house manager. "Mrs. Brooks and Nia will not leave through the service entrance. They will sit in the east study until I decide otherwise. Put someone outside the door." The manager nodded, but Richard added, "Not your people. Mine." He called over his head of personal security, a former Secret Service agent named Grant, and spoke low enough that only those nearest heard. "No one enters that room except Caleb, Marcia, Claire Dunn, or me. No phones taken. No bag searched. No private conversations with them." Tasha looked at him then, really looked, as if she had been waiting all night for the house itself to decide whether she and her child were people or problems. Nia kept the smallest torn piece in her palm. Richard noticed and held out his hand. "May I see it?" Nia hesitated. Her fingers opened halfway, then closed again. "If I give it away, it might disappear." Richard did not look offended. He reached into his jacket, took out a clean business envelope, and placed it on the table in front of her. Then you seal it. Nia studied his face, then slipped the scrap inside herself and pressed the flap down with both thumbs. Caleb wrote the time across the front. 8:46 p.m. The small act changed the room more than any speech could have. Richard had not taken evidence from the child. He had let her keep it safe. A few minutes later, in the east study, rain began touching the tall windows in soft, uneven taps. Tasha sat on the edge of a leather chair too expensive to look comfortable. Nia stood beside a table where untouched hot chocolate had formed a pale skin across the top. Richard entered with Caleb and closed the door behind them. The hallway outside held the low sound of Grant's shoes stopping in place. Nia, Richard said. You said she came out of the library with the blue folder under her arm. Which arm? Nia did not answer quickly. She looked at her own hands, remembering. Left, she said, because her right hand had the green pin. She held it tight, like this. She curled her fingers inward. Caleb's eyes flicked to Richard. Vivian always carried her clutch in her left hand at public events. If her left arm had held the folder, then the gala photos with the clutch on that arm could not have been taken at 11:17, unless the timeline had been arranged afterward. Richard pulled out his phone and sent one message to Claire Dunn. Subpoena camera backups, gala timestamp originals, veil printer logs. Do not notify Martin. Then he looked at Marcia, who stood near the bookshelves with a tablet. Copy everything before midnight. Off-site. Already in progress, Marcia said. On her screen, a thin blue bar moved slowly across a file transfer. 38%. 41. In the silence, Nia whispered, She's going to ask where I am. Richard looked at her. Why? Because when grown-ups want somebody to change a story, they don't ask in front of everybody. No one spoke for a moment. Then Richard opened the study door and stepped back into the hall. Vivian was already there, one hand lifted toward the handle, her phone glowing in the other. She smiled when she saw him, but the smile stopped when she saw Nia standing behind him. Not hidden, not escorted out, not alone. Richard rested one hand lightly on the doorframe and said, Anything you need from Nia, you can ask with me present. Vivian's eyes moved from his face to the sealed envelope in Nia's hand, and for the first time that night, she understood that the smallest person in the house had just been given a guard, a witness, and the ear of the man whose name was on every wall. By morning, the rain had washed the driveway clean, but nothing inside the Ellison house felt clean anymore. The Eleanor Trust Committee gathered in the Walnut boardroom beside the library, the same wing where the clock had struck 11:17, the same hallway where Nia had once been told not to linger. Vivian stood at the head of the table in a pale gray suit, one hand resting near Richard's chair, while Martin Vale arranged his legal folders with the calm of a man who had spent his life making paper sound like truth. Nia sat beside Tasha near the wall, not at the table, until Richard entered and pulled out the empty chair beside Caleb. Nia Brooks sits here, he said. No one argued, but several people looked down as she climbed onto the chair, her shoes not touching the floor. On the table before Richard lay three things. The sealed envelope Nia had closed herself, the access report, and the torn drawing, now carefully fitted beneath a clear plastic sleeve. Vivian gave the room a sad, generous smile. Before we begin, I want to say I regret last night's unpleasantness. A child became confused, and emotions ran high. Richard looked at her hands. They were folded perfectly. Just one question, he said. Had you ever seen Nia's drawing before last night? Vivian answered gently. Only when she brought it into the room. And you had no idea what was in it? Of course not. Richard nodded once. Claire Dunn, the outside counsel, stepped forward and placed the access log beside the drawing. Then let's keep this simple. Richard tapped the printed time. Your key card opened the private elevator at 11:17. The library lock opened 1 minute later. The North Hall camera was offline during the same 11-minute window. Vivian did not flinch. My card was cloned. Martin can confirm that is possible. Martin leaned in. It is possible, yes. And this is exactly why Mr. Ellison should avoid public accusations without forensic review. Nia stared at the drawing, not at them. She didn't use both hands, she said. Every adult turned. Nia swallowed, then pointed at the lower corner of the picture. The folder was under her left arm. The pin was in her right hand. At the gala picture Miss Vivian showed on her phone, her clutch was in her left hand the whole time. Caleb slid the printed gala photograph across the table. The timestamp read 11:18 p.m., but Vivian's clutch hung from her left wrist, her hand visible beneath a ballroom light. Richard's fingers stopped on the edge of the photo. He took off his glasses slowly and set them down. For several seconds, he could not look at his son. Vivian's smile began to thin. A photo can be timestamped incorrectly. That's true, Claire said, and placed another page down. So we pulled the original metadata from the hospital's photographer. That photo was taken at 9:06 p.m. It was posted later. Martin reached for the page. Claire did not let him take it. Vivian's voice cooled. This still does not prove I knew anything about some blue folder. Richard lifted his eyes. I didn't say blue folder. The boardroom became so quiet the old clock could be heard ticking through the wall. Vivian's lips parted, then closed. She gave a small laugh. Richard, everyone has been saying folder since last night. Nia shook her head. Not blue. Claire opened the sealed envelope and removed the last torn piece. Nia had drawn Vivian's hand, the green brooch, and the corner of the blue file. The childish letters were crooked but readable. Caleb Mental Fitness Review. Martin's pen rolled off his folder and struck the floor. Claire placed the final document on top of everything else. Eleanor Ellison's original trust directive, recovered from the bank copy Richard had authorized before sunrise. It stated, in Eleanor's own signature, that no fiancé, spouse, advisor, or family attorney could alter Caleb's control without a unanimous independent review. Under it, Claire placed a printer record from Martin's office, showing the altered review drafted 3 days earlier. Vivian turned toward Martin. You told me that clause was removable. The words left her before she understood they had nowhere to hide. Richard's face went white in a way Nia had never seen on a rich man. Not pale from fear. Pale from finally seeing the house he owned had been used against the people inside it. He stood, placed Nia's torn drawing in the center of the board table, and said quietly, No one leaves. No one moved. Not because Richard had raised his voice, but because every person in that boardroom understood the sound of power when it stopped asking politely. Grant stepped in from the hall and closed the doors. Claire Dunn gathered the access report, the printer logs, the original trust directive, and Nia's torn drawing into separate evidence sleeves, labeling each one in black ink while Martin Vale watched his career leave him page by page. Vivian did not cry. She tried something colder. Richard, think carefully, she said. If this becomes public, it hurts Caleb. It hurts the trust. It hurts Eleanor's name. Caleb's hand tightened on the arm of his chair, but before Richard could answer, Nia leaned forward and said, Mrs. Eleanor's name is already hurt if people use it to lie. The words were not polished. They were not legal. That was why they reached every corner of the room. Richard sat down slowly, as if the chair had appeared beneath him only because standing had become too much. He looked at Caleb first. I let people speak about you as if grief made you weak, he said. I let them put soft words around a cage. Caleb's eyes filled, but he did not look away. Then Richard turned to Tasha, still sitting near the wall with both hands folded around her work badge. Mrs. Brooks, I allowed my house to make you defend your honesty while you were serving my family dinner. His voice broke on the last word, not loudly, just enough. I am sorry. No condition. No excuse. Tasha did not answer right away. She looked at Nia, because for years her first instinct had been to measure danger before accepting kindness. Finally, she said, Then don't let them do this to the next woman who works here. Richard nodded once. That answer cost him more than forgiveness would have. Vivian was removed from the boardroom by security, not dragged, not humiliated for spectacle, but escorted past the same hallway where she had tried to make a child disappear. Martin Vale was suspended immediately from all Ellison family matters, reported to the State Bar by Claire, and locked out of every trust file before noon. By the end of the day, the hospital gala timestamps, security maintenance orders, and altered drafts were preserved for civil action and possible criminal referral. Richard ended the engagement publicly in a written statement that did not mention heartbreak, betrayal, or privacy. It said the Ellison Trust had been used to target an employee and a family member, and that his own failure to question that system had helped make it possible. Tasha's resignation form was destroyed in front of her, then replaced with a formal letter clearing her record, back pay for every unpaid overtime hour Marcia found, and an independent attorney assigned to represent her interests, not Richard's. Nia was offered a scholarship account managed outside the Ellison family, but Richard asked before signing anything. Nia looked at the paper, then at her mother. "Can Mama choose first?" she asked. So Tasha chose safe housing away from staff quarters, health insurance restored through a new employee protection fund, and the right to leave the mansion job without losing the support her daughter had earned by telling the truth. A month later, the living room looked different. The velvet gift boxes were gone. The white marble floor had been cleaned, but one thing had been left exactly where the pain happened. Nia's drawing hung above the fireplace in a simple wooden frame, its torn lines still visible beneath the glass. Under it, a small brass plate carried no donor name, no Ellison logo, only 4 words Richard had asked Nia to approve. She saw the truth. Caleb stood beside her with a roll of yellow ribbon in his hand. "Do you want a new frame someday?" he asked. Nia studied the tape marks, the green brooch, the little clock showing 11:17. Then she shook her head. "No," she said. "If it wasn't torn, nobody would know what it survived." Richard heard her from across the room and lowered his eyes, not in shame this time, but in respect. That evening, Nia sat at the big table with her mother, Caleb, and Richard, her feet still not touching the floor, her name written on a place card in dark blue ink. The smallest seat in the room was no longer empty.